Towson happened in Major League Baseball at this point, so anytime there's a hockey game on, as Jimmy Buffett once sang, it's 20 degrees and the hockey game's on, or for at least a little while longer, the Maryland Terps continue to sort of circle the drain slowly in the Big Ten. Luke Jones joins us now after yet another road loss, and you know, it's one thing to go to Michigan State and lose by 30 points or to get obliterated by Ohio State or whatever. It's a whole different thing when you're in a game in Indiana. You got to lead late in the game, and same thing would be said for Michigan last week. You know, winnable games that in the end they're just not winning. And quite frankly, Luke, in the end, the last couple of minutes of all these games, I don't think they're going to win. I don't get the feeling that somebody's going to hit a shot to win.
Yeah, I just don't think they're very good. I mean, now, how good would they have been if Justin Jackson were healthy and they hadn't lost Yvonne Bender? And
we'll never know.
Even more strain on their front court. I mean, who knows? I mean, I wasn't envisioning this team being, a Final Four team or anything crazy like that. I mean, I thought they'd make the NCAA tournament, but you're seeing just a team that is just not very good. When we're talking in late January and the one good win that you have is over Butler, I mean, I don't know what you can hang your hat on in terms of an NCAA tournament resume, in terms of really thinking that this team is very good at all. And, you know, you go to Indiana on Monday night, Bruno Fernando doesn't start because they're trying to keep him out of foul trouble, and then he turns his ankle, and he's had ankle issues even going back to before the season started. So you're left with Joshua Tomaic and Michael Tchaikovsky as far as real front court guys. You know, I mean, clearly they'll put some other guys in there because those guys need a rest, but it doesn't work out well.
Well, once you get Fernando out of the game, you kind of have won in the Big Ten if you have big guys, right? Like, and most of these teams have that going on, and that's, you know, everything's missing here without Jackson, right? And we wondered how they would turn it around. Well, they're probably not going to. I mean, and they might steal a game on the road somewhere, but, I mean, we're down to, there's only a month left in the season, only 8 games left in the season now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and other than the next two, I mean, against Michigan State and Purdue, I mean,
we're not going to be feeling good about ourselves over the next week, that's for sure.
Well, but there's that. But other than that, I mean, you can win all those other games. It's great, but you know, what are you doing that the committee is going to take you over any other team with a very mediocre resume? So as far as Monday night, I mean, you really miss Justin Jackson not having someone to man up against Juwan Morgan, who absolutely dominated the Terps, finished with 25 points. And it's really tough when, you know, you don't have Fernando out on the floor, and Tomaic and Michael Tchaikovsky combined for 0 points.
Boy, Tchaikovsky's just like, I mean, he's not a Big Ten player, maybe, right? I mean,
well,
like, literally, like, he would be an unbelievable player at Towson or UMBC or something, but at Maryland, you know, I don't think he's ever going to be a factor guy.
Well, I mean, I think it's harsh to say he's not a Big Ten player. But he is what he is. He's a role guy, you know. I mean, if he's someone that you're going to need to score,
he's not a Big Ten player you're going to win with,
right? Well, I mean, he's not. But you're not going to have all Big Ten players at every position. Is my point. My point is, you know, when you have no one in the front court that you can count on to score, it makes things very, very difficult. I mean, we saw with Fernando out of the game, Indiana didn't have to respect anything inside, and they were able to D up Anthony Cowan and Kevin Huerter a little bit differently. I thought it was clear that Cowan really, really struggled in the second half, just was frustrated, was kept trying to go to the basket, which I like it in principle, but it was very clear it wasn't working.
Well, like in the last 3-4 minutes of the game where they had an opportunity to win, I think he felt like, well, I'm not going to give the ball to any of the rest of these guys. You know, I mean, maybe Huerter, but I don't know who else. I mean, you'd want Huerter taking a shot. I don't want to be disrespectful to him. He's hit big shots. Hit one the other night. But other than that, you don't have a lot going on there if you're Cowan. And especially when you came into this thing last year where you had a lot of options. You know, where you were the least likely guy to shoot the ball, kind of, sort of, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, Anthony Cowan, and keep in mind, this kid's a sophomore, and I mean, he's out there with, you know, some less than stellar options inside, and you know, when you don't have anyone inside that you can really trust to score the basketball, it's going to be extremely tough.
And they let him rest right when the game ends. When the game ends, they take him off the floor. Is usually when they take him off, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just so.
Well, I mean, you can't have him play 40 minutes a night. I mean, right? I mean,
he's playing 40 minutes a night. I mean, but that's the thing. They have no one else. I mean, who's their backup point guard? Kevin Huerter, probably, the way things stand right now.
I've seen Bino. Bino and our friends on Facebook. I've seen him run the point. He did it for me back in '89 over at Golden Ring Middle. So let Bino run the point back up.
Yeah,
I got 8 minutes in him.
But you just don't have anyone else. And look, I mean, you can certainly point to their backcourt depth and say, well, you'd like to have a backup point guard that you trust, but this is where they are right now. So, Cowan's playing 40 minutes a night. Kevin Huerter, I think, played all but 1 minute in Monday night's game. And, those are your two guys. And, if one of them's going to struggle in the way that Cowan did in the second half, I mean, he finished with 18 points, but 6 of 18 shooting. I mean, that's a problem. So, and also had 6 turnovers. So when you have one of your two big guy, your two go-to guys, one of them doesn't play well in the second half, it makes things very, very difficult. I mean, the truth is Maryland was pretty fortunate to be in that game and to have a lead with 5 minutes to go because they did not play good basketball in the second half. Indiana really didn't either.
They're not very good. I mean, let's recap that there was a reason Harbaugh's brother-in-law got fired last year. They still kind of sort of stink, which is kind of shocking at Indiana, right? Like that a really lame Doug Maryland team be running around with them. You wonder. Look, Bobby Knight was a long time ago, right? So I mean, we can talk about the legend of Indiana, and when the game comes on at 7:00, I said to my wife, I'm like, there aren't a whole lot of places that I still want to go and see something like a game. That's a place I still want to go and see a game. And you and I have been through this a couple of times with our trips out to Indianapolis. That's a legendary place. That's not a very good basketball team there either, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're fifth in the Big Ten right now, but it's just the reality of this conference right now. That's why if you look at some of the bracketology and some of the projections out there, I mean, people are saying 4 teams in the Big Ten, and it's pretty clear-cut who it's going to be: Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan. Now, does that change at some point here over the next 3 or 4 weeks? It's always possible, but it's really tough to point to another team and say, yeah, I think they're going to be the team that makes the run. In fact, a lot of other places right now are probably trying to look at a team like Maryland and thinking, well, maybe they can make the run, but you got to start winning games. And we've talked about this. I mean, you can keep talking about facing Michigan State and facing Purdue and what that could mean. You just got to win games, and specifically, you got to start winning some road games. And Maryland's they haven't been able to do that. So I'm not sure what's going to change over the next 3 or 4 weeks. That's really going to make me change my opinion on them. But they're just not very good. And we've even seen from a situational standpoint them have breakdowns late in games where they've had leads at Michigan, at Indiana. I mean, you can't turn the ball over. You can't make silly mistakes. And we've seen them do that on top of just struggling to either score or defend. And it adds up to, they're not horrible. They're very mediocre in a conference that, once you get past the top 4, is not very good whatsoever, for a power conference anyway. And it's really difficult kind of figuring out how to chart a path for the tournament now, short of Maryland trying to win one of these next 2 games, which I can't say I have much hope or optimism that they're going to be able to do that.
Luke and I are getting on a plane to Minnesota on Sunday morning. We will be monitoring all things Michigan State from afar. That is a 1 o'clock game on Sunday. Then, of course, the Purdue game comes next week on the road as well out at Mackey. And Purdue's the better team right now, or at least the perception thereof in the middle of the season. We were worried more about Michigan State all along. I watched them play into the night last night against Illinois, and Purdue's the better team right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, Purdue can make a pretty good case for being number 1 in the country, or at least close to it. I mean, they're number 3. They're still undefeated in the conference. I wouldn't sleep on Michigan State. I mean, I think anyone who does that is setting up to be surprised by Tom Izzo's team. I mean, that's just the way it is. But right now, I mean, Purdue, and give Ohio State a lot of credit. They're 9-0 in the conference at this point. So they've certainly played very good basketball. And
Purdue has them back-to-back, by the way. They play Ohio State on the 7th, and they play Michigan State on the 10th. Ohio State at home at Mackey, and then they go to Michigan State on the 10th. So, there'll be a little tussle there right after we get back from the Super Bowl about what's going to happen in the Big Ten. And then, of course, the tournament's going to be up in New York later on in the month as well. But those teams will all see each other and beat up on each other a little bit as well.
Yeah, and that's, that's kind of how this tends to work. But again, I think if you're Maryland, if you're Indiana, you're looking at all these other teams. Who really stands out as having a chance to sneak into the tournament? And right now, it's really difficult seeing that path. I mean, Maryland's kind of been hanging on that bubble, either on the right side or the wrong, the last few weeks. If you look at all the projections, and I know the projections aren't gospel, but people that follow that and have a good fingerprint on the pulse of the entire thing and what's going on around the country, Maryland's just not doing anything to help themselves. I mean, you beat bad teams. What's that really doing for you? I mean, it's great to beat Minnesota or Iowa, but you have to win games. You got to start beating some teams on the road, and at some point, you got to come away with a win that people are impressed with. The committee's going to be impressed with, and it's just not happening for the Terps. And now with Bruno Fernando not knowing what his status is going to be, at least short term, with the ankle, things just aren't going to get any easier. And I think the thing that was probably frustrating beyond Bruno getting hurt on Monday night was that Maryland actually got some decent offensive contributions from Jared Nickens and Deion Wiley. They combined for 20 points off the bench, and we've talked about Jared Nickens being a complete disappointment since his freshman season.
Yeah, he hit that three. I was happy with him for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I mean, he hit 4 of 7 from downtown. I mean, certainly doesn't defend how you'd like him to, but we know that's not part of his game. That's just who he is at this point. And Wiley gave them a spark off the bench as well, but it's just not enough. I mean, you saw what they were having to do defensively when Bruno left the game, and I mean, Morgan was just eating them up, and it's just you're not getting any scoring. You don't have you don't have the defensive presence in the paint that you need to have. I mean, other than that, everything's fine. But
other than losing every other night. He is Luke Jones. He's Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can follow his journey out there as well as we await a Steve Bisciotti press conference. And as of now, nothing on that. And then we await baseball as we're going to Minnesota on Sunday. We'll be doing plenty of football next week. The baseball side of this thing has gotten to be like where every day I'm reading a Jeff Passan or a Joe Posnanski or a Ken Rose. All the baseball guys are waiting for this as well. And the C word has started to come out. And I don't know where I don't know where Jake Arrieta is going to play, but I know it's going to be at a deep discount because nobody's going to bid him up And it starts to make me wonder, quite frankly, 2 years ago, had the Orioles just said to Chris Davis, no thank you, we're going to sign Mark Trumbo, where would he have signed,
Yeah. Well, remember at the time, and I guess not necessarily at the time, but a few months later, it had been talked that Detroit would have been after him and had interest. I mean, I don't know how serious that interest was, but this whole thing, I mean, it's one thing to talk about collusion, and I know Jeff Passan wrote a really good piece on that last week, but I thought the big picture question here is about the overall economic structure, the overall structure of how players are paid and the next collective bargaining agreement. I think baseball could be very much headed towards a work stoppage in that regard because whether it's collusion or whether it's just teams getting smart finally. I mean, you and I, and it's not just you and I, but we've talked about this over and over, whether we're talking about Chris Davis or Albert Pujols signing with the Angels or, just go down the list. Most of these $100 million plus contracts stink. They're not good for the team. You are lucky if you get a couple years that are good, and then the rest of it is absolutely terrible. How much of this might just be because we are in an information age, and sabermetrics aren't just a craze. That stuff's not going away. Teams are getting smarter. Now, you can certainly question if they're conspiring behind closed doors, and certainly people are going to have their opinions about that. Or it might just be that teams have seen enough of these $100+ million contracts going to players on the wrong side of 30, and seeing how big of a loser those deals tend to be. So even if teams are getting smart, on the flip side, then the union has, which we know that baseball's union has lost a lot of its power in recent years, and that's certainly something that they have to kind of point to and say, well, what happened here? What concessions did we make here? But the way the system has always been that cheap, controllable talent those first 3 years, and then arbitration eligible years 3-4 years after that, and then you hit free agency, and whether you're close to 30 or not, it's always kind of been, well, that's when you're made whole. You put up great production, your best production of your career, under a system where you're not making a whole lot of money, but then you get to free agency finally, and that's when you cash in. But teams are starting to get wise, I think, and cheap, whatever you want to call it, but they're seeing that you're ultimately paying a guy for what he's already done rather than what he's going to do, and then they're getting smart. Well, that's great for the team, but that's clearly a big problem for the players and the union. So, does that mean once we are up for the next collective bargaining agreement that they want to completely overhaul the economic system?
Well, they're at the brink of war here now, right?
Yeah,
I started this when I was 12 years old, 1981, right? And it started long before that, where these guys don't get along. And one thing we talk about a lot with the NFL, we'll be talking about it next week when every Dom Foxworth comes by and talks about the Players Association and CTE and the league and getting along, is that they talk about peace and they talk about partnership, but when it really comes down to it, if you're a baseball player or an agent right now, or even a fan right now, how can you look at this baseball offseason and say, Mr. Angelos is doing his best to win? I mean, it's disgraceful, quite frankly, industry-wide, not just a couple of these guys, but what the Marlins have done after buying the new team, and all of them do the same thing every nerd in the basement does. They point to the Astros, they point to the Royals, and they say, my team doesn't need to spend money. We should save our money right now for later. And ownership loves that because they just put profit in their pocket, and if they're ever good enough, yeah, maybe they go out like Houston did and spent a lot. I remember 2 years ago, Houston didn't have any money. Now they're bringing Garrett Cole in all of a sudden. They're trying to win. Kansas City had all the Kane and Moustakas and Hosmer all go to the end, and that is a legitimate thing for them to say, I don't want to give those players the Chris Davis deal. Not one of them, certainly not three of them. I understand that, but that's the industry that they've baked this thing into, and then if you don't like that, go back and win 72 games and have the stadium be empty and promote bobblehead night and take your TV money, because that's the other option when you white flag and just say those things that McPhail used to say, which is, well, the Yankees just have the most money, they have the most players, they're just going to win, we're just going to go young and grow the arms and buy the bats and all that stuff and win 72 games. And as a guy who has witnessed this for 3 decades here professionally, I don't like anything about where this thing's going here down the street, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, it's just, as far as the whole, spending money or not, I mean, there are teams that it doesn't really make sense to spend money because you're not going to win.
The Orioles might be one of them. Literally.
The whole point, when Andy McPhail came in, remember, the whole thing was, why are you spending all this money to win 77 games? I mean, you're not going to win the way that this thing is structured. So, I hear what you're saying on that. I mean, we can certainly volley back and forth as far as, payroll and all that. I mean, we know in this day and age, if you're going to be successful over the long term, you have to be able to develop and all of that. But then you want it to be a case where once you've developed, you want to have ownership that's committed to spending money to keep that team together. And certainly that's something that you can debate where that happens and where that doesn't happen. But, again, for years, the system has been set up that you have young players that are going to put up big numbers for you. And, as much as we always used to think of a player's prime as being like age 28 through 31, it's not. A player's prime is much younger than that. And the numbers support that when you look at sites that really break down those types of things and track that data. So you have these players who are cheap, controllable. You're not paying them much, especially pre-arbitration, and even arbitration, it's still very much a controlled system in favor of ownership, in favor of management. And then when they're supposed to be getting paid in theory, now they're going to the market, and you have teams that are saying, well, that's not the best investment, which, by the way, they're right. But again, where are players then being made whole? And that's where the next collective bargaining agreement, whether this is collusion or not, I don't know. I mean, it might just be that this is inherent collusion because teams are finally getting smart, and they're not giving the Chris Davises of the world $100+ million.
And they're not paying Jake Arrieta to be a 20-game winner in 2022. Right?
I mean,
literally.
Do you really want to give Jake Arrieta, who's on the wrong side of 30, and even though he's still pitched well the last couple of years, but things haven't trended in the right direction for him since that Cy Young season, do you really want to give him $150 million in guaranteed money? I don't. But again, therein lies the problem that guys like Jake Arrieta, who put up those big numbers 3-4 years ago, they weren't getting paid for what they actually did back then. So if they weren't getting paid back then, free agency was always the idea that was going to make players whole, and they're finally going to cash in, and, well, it's not happening now. So what does that mean? Does that mean that baseball, the union is going to aim to completely turn the system upside down? Well, I don't know if Tony Clark has the stomach for it. So, I mean, based on how they've handled themselves here in recent years, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do from a leadership standpoint between now and when the next CBA, agreement is up for discussion, and it's going to be really, really interesting in that regard. I mean, at some point here, we're going to get movement, but is that movement going to be a bunch of one-year contracts? Which, by the way, take a look at all the deals that have been signed to this point in the season. I don't think, unless I've missed one here recently, I'm not sure there's been one for longer than 3 years. These have been short-term commitments and teams that have offered a lot of one-year deals. And that tends to be, if you go back to the collusion back in the 80s, I mean, that tends to be what you see, a lot of shorter.
Mike Flanagan taught me all about that and how Andy McPhail was involved.
So, I mean, it is very fishy. And again, do I think that necessarily there was a concerted backroom kind of meeting? I don't know about that, but it's definitely very, very strange. And bringing it back to the Orioles, who knows? As far as they've always operated slowly, in the Dan Duquette, even before that, but specifically with this regime, they've always done things slowly and made signings in February and even March. And when you have the entire industry doing that, I mean, I don't know how this is all going to play out. But
Dan Duquette, finally a leader in the industry.
I know, right? Well, I mean, we've said it all along. I mean, a lot of these deals are loser-type deals, but it is strange that it seemed to happen almost overnight. You know what I mean? Like, it's very, very, very strange. And for those that jump to conclusions and think about conspiracy, it's hard not to think that there's some fishy stuff going on behind closed doors, besides just teams finally getting wise to the idea of, maybe it's not smart to give a 32-year-old a 7-year contract. But, well, it didn't stop the Orioles from doing it with Chris Davis a couple years ago, and we've seen how that one has already turned out, where 2 years in it already looks like nothing short of disastrous.
Yeah, I would never accuse Mr. Angelos of doing anything fishy. We all know that. But pitchers and catchers report in about 2.5 weeks. We will be reporting to Minnesota and the Mall of America and Super Bowl 52 next week. We are expecting Ray Lewis to be nominated for induction this summer into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Our road trip is on sale now under the road trips tab at WNST.net. It's going to include some baseball for those of you who love the summer seams, as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as we go out to the Midwest in August. Had a lot of heat on that trip. You can buy it right now at WNST.net. Also, we'll be broadcasting all day, all night in Minnesota next week. We're looking forward to our Super Bowl 52 coverage as well. You can find me out in the Bay at Toyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day, all week long. Congratulations to all of our friends in Philadelphia. A lot of them former Ravens, as we'll be going through that list next week when we get out to Minnesota. And if I don't freeze too much, I'll go track down Torrey Smith and Jimmy Schwartz and Timmy Jernigan and all the rest of them, Corey Graham, and say hello, and shoot some videos and some audios and some fun ahead as Anybody that beats the Patriots at this point, I'm okay. I mean, even the Steelers, I would have been okay with. That's where I am with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. We can only hope that it's the end and that the confetti does not go off for them. You can find me out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Our morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. Every morning now with a chapter of Purple Rain 2, as well as Luke's insights on the Ravens offseason, as well as the Orioles and the Terps and the Caps from Eddie Frankovic. All of it is there every morning at 7 a.m., all brought to you by Planet Fitness, where it's still $10 a month and never any commitment. Last but never least, on Thursday, Dennis will be here driving you home from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST. Coons Ford also sponsors our WNST tech service. So if there is any breaking news, if the Orioles deal Manny Machado to the Diamondbacks, you'll get that first. Or the Indians. The Indians were the rumor this weekend. He's been dealt everywhere except not being dealt, which is what's going to happen, and I'm sure we'll see him in Sarasota in a couple weeks as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me for praise, criticism. Luke at WNST.net finds him. He is Baltimore Luke. I am me out on Twitter. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.